Hey, and welcome back to the show. Today we'll be doing another episode on sustainability. This will be our final episode in the sustainability series. So we're just going to talk a little bit about sustainability from a bigger picture, kind of more of a holistic view on it, and then some other interesting applications of sustainability in general. So hope you enjoy it.
I'm Hunter.
And I'm Luke, and you're listening to Epistem, a show where we explore papers in STEM fields and let you know what they're all about. I think one of the things about sustainability that maybe isn't a negative, but it just kind of gets overlooked is that it's kind of like a buzzword. Gets used a lot, gets thrown around very loosely. And I mean, that on one hand, it means that it's being researched a lot and it's being discussed a lot, which is a good thing. But like I said, it gets overlooked in a lot of ways. It's present in basically every industry in some form or another. There is the more obvious applications of sustainability, like energy generation and recycling, but they're only one piece of a very large puzzle, So there's sustainability in the plastics industry, for example. When you think about what's good or bad for the environment, a lot of people think about plastic as being a largely negative thing, but you can reduce a lot of waste by using specialty engineered polymers and plastics that do their job so well that the lifespan of a particular product can be expanded, and there's less waste in that sense. Or just other ways that you can reduce waste in some areas just by having more well-engineered materials in general. So, plastic isn't necessarily a bad thing when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah, and as you said, sustainability is a very, very wide topic. Sustainability doesn't necessarily relate to environmental changes in general, such as climate change and just helping trees and plants. It can also relate to the environment within a workspace, such as working on process efficiency or just efficiency within a workspace in general. That's sustainable because you're actually cutting out the waste within your system, even if it's not directly impacting an outer environment such as trees. It's impacting the environment of a workspace.
Yeah, it's really just kind of a general idea about almost like a budget, controlling what's coming in and what's going out, such that you're taking into account all of the factors that happen, before you have your hands on something, whether it's a process or a product, while you have it, and then what happens to it afterwards throughout its whole life cycle. There's the idea of sustainability in architecture and in air conditioning, such that houses that are built are more thermally efficient, so it requires less energy to heat and cool those houses, which is kind of another thing, another application of what we talked about in the urban heat episode. But yeah, I mean, it's just everywhere. There's also just, in general, like I mentioned earlier, manufacturing. There's a million opportunities to minimize waste there, whether it's in R&D, using better simulations to minimize how much waste is generated in testing processes.
Yeah.
So throughout the series, we talked about a lot of different forms of sustainability. One of them was in agriculture, which kind of focused on hydroponic technology and food science.
As we talked about with Hydrogrow itself, it's not the only company that's trying to bring hydroponics to homes. A company called FarmBot is actually using hydroponics alongside CNC technology to automate home gardens. They're more based on enhancing current gardens rather than revolutionizing a new way of growing, as Hydrogrow is doing. FarmBot is using CNC mechanics to do precision planting, weeding, and watering of home garden systems, and this could possibly be industrialized in the future. A lot of other companies are actually creating hydroponic systems that are not automated for those that want to set them up in their gardens or just for their plants in general, to have a cleaner and a more water-based plant growth system. Hydroponics also can lead to a lot of advancements in farming, industrialized, as we've talked about in the hydroponic hero episode, and also just help with any of those plant lovers out there.
Yeah, what I've noticed a lot with the agriculture and hydroponics research that we've done is that so much of growing food is kind of a little bit of a mystery. It's very much a science that's not super well understood by a lot of people, especially the way that we're doing it now.
Which is a crazy thing to think about. It's part of your everyday life, but you don't really know much about it.
Right, there's just so much room for growth. So that like you tied into, it's another application that we talked about in sustainability is with water and the way that water demand can be mitigated. And that involves things like materials science and climatology. Another subject we covered was urban development in our most recent episode. This might be important to you if you're in the construction industry or in city planning or architecture.
Yeah, and we mention it very often, how much engineering in the real world relates with biomimicry and just plants and nature in general. And this can be related to how cities work in a similar manner to forests. A lot of large cities have what people call urban canopies. This happens when there are shorter buildings surrounded by larger buildings, and the heat being radiated and reflected from the smaller buildings can be trapped by the larger adjacent buildings. This is similar to any rainforest or other large forest system where the heat gets trapped, and that's actually why the rainforest is so wet, is because the moisture gets trapped within the forest itself. I find it's very interesting that this inadvertent relation to nature wouldn't necessarily be considered biomimicry exactly, but it can relate to Oscar Wilde saying, "Life imitates art."
It's just a reminder that, we're subject to the same laws of nature that nature is. We can't escape it with any amount of engineering, Well, I don't. Maybe that's attempting engineers, but
maybe. As we talked about in our previous episode, Hot City Summer, urban heat islands can lead to the increase of temperature in bodies of water near urban areas due to pavements and rooftops increasing the temperature of runoff water. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, or as many know it, EPA, have looked into methods of combating the rise of temperature in water systems. One large method that they're looking at is utilizing permeable pavement. This can help with reducing runoff by having the runoff and snow be absorbed into the soil easier, and thus helping to give more water to the plants nearby and the plants within the pavement itself. Permeable pavement would be considered in parking areas or places that have low traffic. The design of permeable pavement has been narrowed down to porous asphalt, which in essence would contain layers of small, slightly packed top layers of asphalt material, followed by layers of a larger material that is spaced farther apart to allow for more flow of liquids.
That's cool because it's like literally turning impervious surface into green surface, or maybe not specifically green surface, but serving the same function of green surface.
Exactly, and allowing for a lot of benefits to the environment itself, allowing for more nature to grow, and also just help alleviate any temperature rises around lakes, and eventually leading to ocean temperature rises through tributaries and other means.
Yeah.
So we've related this episode already to our previous episodes in the series, but what we haven't talked about yet is how sustainability can be related to economics, and we'll bring that to you after this break. Welcome back, and now Luke wants to talk about some sustainability and economics.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because, like I said earlier, there's a lot of applications of sustainability which may not be super obvious. You say sustainability, people think, windmills and are they even still called windmills, or should I call them wind turbines now?
Turbines.
Yeah, I guess there's not many people using wind to grind grains and stuff anymore. Maybe there are. I don't know.
Maybe there are.
I don't want to make any assumptions. But anyways, that's typically what people think of. But in economics, there's an interesting book. Unfortunately, I have not got the chance to read it yet, but it's on my list, called Donut Economics. And this is, I guess, a term that's been coined by Kate Raworth. That's the name of the book she wrote. So the basic idea behind this is that there is such thing as having a shortage of consumption, if you want to think of it that way, which would result in disparity and poverty. And that's just saying you're not giving your people, you're not giving society enough for it to survive happily. But then there's also, on the other side of that, there exists overconsumption or depletion of resources based on your planet. So you want to exist kind of in that middle ground. If you imagine a donut, in the center of the donut where there's nothing, there's not enough consumption and people aren't meeting their social needs. But then if you consume too much, you're kind of going beyond the donut and you're consuming more than your planet can provide, which would be, in this case, unsustainable economics. So you want to exist in the donut somewhere. Hopefully, become the donut. Hopefully that makes some sense. Become the donut. Be the donut.
That makes sense.
Great. But that's an idea of sustainability in economics, what that might look like. Somewhat related to economics in the sense that it's very much economy driven would be power generation, but specifically the grid and microgrids within the grid. So just for a definition, for those who aren't super familiar with the idea of microgrids, it's basically just the idea that you generate your power locally. So instead of tapping into power generated by the city, you're tapping into power that's generated maybe by your neighborhood or your small community. And this power is separate from the big power plant that's fueling your whole city or whatever. And sometimes this can be done with diesel or non-renewable sources. But obviously for the sake of this episode, we're talking about the renewable versions of microgrids. So microgrids that are powered by solar cells or by wind turbines or hydrogen fuel cells, where hydrogen is either produced or imported to the community. There are a lot of areas in the world that are isolated from large grids, so they didn't really have an option to plug into the grid. For example, in the Amazon rainforest, there's not a whole lot of infrastructure for running power lines across the country. And, there's mountains and there's rivers and dense forests, so they kind of rely on diesel imports to power their cities. And even then, they can only get enough fuel to power the city for a couple hours at a time. So you can imagine where having a well-developed microgrid would be really beneficial for these types of communities. There's also situations such as in rural areas of Sweden where winter storms can often cause power outages by just damaging transmission lines or knocking things over, that kind of thing. And a couple years ago, there was a big research project that ended with a town being able to fully support itself on a decentralized 100% green energy microgrid.
So speaking of Sweden actually uses a lot of geothermal energy, and they use this through what they call ground source heat pumps, or GSHPs, and they use this to heat homes and to heat water within cities and rural areas.
And one of the nice things about microgrids that kind of distinguishes them from just a backup generator is that the microgrid can be integrated and connected with the larger grid. There are also some power providers that will pay you for generating electricity for them. So if you do have a surplus, it goes back into the main grid and saves you on your electricity bill. So there are a lot of applications for this, throughout a wide variety of economic status or geography. I know even some hospitals and manufacturing plants have hydrogen-based backups, which is for something as large as a hospital or manufacturing plant could almost be considered a microgrid in its own right.
Just to close off this episode, I want to just talk about a little sustainability that you might notice within the world around us. Well, here in the U.S., we are moving over to a lot of sustainable energy, so you'll see a lot of wind turbines or photovoltaic panels around around farm areas and starting to move towards cities nowadays. A good example would be if you've ever actually flown to Europe. Most of the time you fly through Amsterdam to get to many European cities. If you look out the window, you'll notice that there are a lot of wind turbines and generators within the water outside of Amsterdam that'll actually produce energy from out in the ocean. So they're actually harnessing the powers of nature and the differences in tide levels and also the more potent winds that are out in the ocean. So they're using these to their advantage, as the U.S. and other countries are also trying to move forward and use these to their advantage themselves.
So I think that about wraps it up then for today and for the sustainability series. I think this is a lot of cool stuff going on in here, and what's interesting is that there's probably a whole range of sustainability projects going on in your country and in your community and at the companies in your community. They probably all have something on their website about the things that they're doing, the steps they're taking to improve their sustainability measures. So if you're interested in that, check those out. See all the different things that are being done to address sustainability as a whole. But that does bring us to the end of the episode. So thanks again for tuning in. If you've got any feedback or suggestions for the show, feel free to reach out to us on our email, which is epistem.pod@gmail.com.
Follow us on Instagram at epi.stem.
Or if you're feeling especially generous, you can support us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/epistem.
Special thanks to all the researchers and the people we interviewed to help us with this series. You should stop listening now. We're done.
What are you doing?
This episode